Welcome to the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking to one of my best former students, Chris Rader, who is not only a great guy and was an excellent student in high school, but has chosen a very interesting path through his post-secondary education. And so Chris and I have been talking for a while about maybe recording a conversation like this and getting into his experiences and some of the decisions he's made, and maybe how that might provide some opportunities to compare education in the United States with some places abroad. So after, almost a year of chatting about doing this, I'm really excited to finally get Chris on the ClassCast podcast. Chris, how you doing today?
Hey, Mr. Tibbens, we can call you Mr. Tibbens, or
I forget, Mr. Tibbens. You can call me Ryan or Tibbens, whatever you're
ooh, I'm
comfortable with.
upgraded to Ryan. That'd be really nice. I'm doing great, man. Thanks
That's
for inviting me out here. I'm excited. This should be cool.
I think this will go well. Just in general, I'm confident, but also because I think your experience is an interesting one. And something I've been trying to do on the podcast is anytime I hit a topic that I think is really cool, I try to make sure that at some point I revisit it. And so I
Mhm.
actually I should know the number. I had a conversation with a former student, Sierra Wharton, who did her undergrad abroad at a school, I believe in Italy, I think. I
In
forget where,
Italy. Okay.
but she went to an American school there for her undergrad. And so we had this really cool conversation. I kept thinking, like, it'd be great to be able to compare that to something. And so you have an even better sort of range of comparisons because you attended undergrad in the United States and then went abroad. So you want to take just a minute and sort of summarize your path through education so the listeners understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, I went to high school. I took one class by you, but it was probably my most fun class, entomology, which now I look at it, probably didn't have to take an entomology class, but sorry. But it was definitely no, you talked about more than just words, and that was super cool. You actually had conversations. But yeah, I got my high school diploma, heritage, and I went to Virginia Tech. I did material science. I started doing a little bit of undergrad research in my sophomore, junior years with two different professors, and then I ended up doing accelerated masters there. So it took about a year and a half to get the masters, and then from my master's professor, he used to work in Switzerland. He extended an offer, and I said, "Well, how many times do I get this kind of opportunity?" And I just took it, and then now I've been there for almost 3 years now. I should be finishing up by next winter, is the plan, but it's PhD, so it's a very optimistic plan.
What is the timing of that normally? Because like, the PhD, I think people say average 2 to 3 years, but that can vary wildly depending on subject area and things
Yeah,
like that.
subject is
So,
a big one. So I only know basically in the science and engineering field. If you do
mhm.
it in the US, it's about 5 to 6 years, but your first 2 years are courses. And in Europe, they don't accept direct PhDs. So you have to have a master's. And so that first 2 years of your PhD in the US would basically be a master's in Europe. But you don't have to write a separate thesis in the US. You just do your direct PhD, do your qualifiers, and then you become a candidate. And then the rest of it is just you working. But yeah, so I had to finish up the master's, get that thesis, a master's of science, not a master's of engineering or economics. It has to be a master's of science, and then you can apply to PhDs in Europe. So overall, it's the same amount of time, whether you do it in the US or you do it in Europe. It's just broken up in Europe.
okay. So what, and you might have said this, I'm trying to track because you've got a lot of things going on. And a lot of this is outside of my direct expertise, say thinking education, English, things like that.
Mhm.
What is your doctorate going to be in when you finish?
It's going to be in polymer chemistry and materials. So I do work on basically plastics. I do a lot of biosourcing of plastics, and I do a lot of composites. So right now, my project is more cellulose composites. We can extract like nanocrystals. Think of it as like carbon filler
Mhm.
in things, and you can change like how stiff they are, and you can get weird properties, and they can do cool things. And that's pretty much what my group does. A lot of these nano composites with these nanomaterials. And basically, I just do a lot of synthesis in the lab.
So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fun would you rank that? Like
How
the most,
fun?
yeah, like, well, because, to
Hmm.
study a thing in this kind of detail, you have to be passionate about it. You have to have an interest. How much of this for you, though, feels like work versus feel like this is kind of fun to do?
I feel like when I actually make the material, when I'm in the lab and I have a bunch of like reagents and I put them in and I let it stir and then I get like a solid, like actual plastic. I mean, that's like indescribable how much fun that is, because I literally made something out of nothing, it feels like. Right. But when you're writing and you're in front of a computer and you got to read everyone's work and you're just trying to scour the earth for a little bit of insight on what to do next, it does get kind of tedious at times, but that's more of my work style. I'm more of a hands-on guy. So I like being in the lab and running everything myself and seeing like everything being made. And I do a lot of mechanical testing. So I break a lot of plastic. I can tell you which plastic is stronger and why. I can pull it, compress it. And that's like what I love doing, is just pretty much making things and breaking them and telling you how they broke. And I love it.
So, I mean, when you describe that piece, that sounds great. And I'm thinking about how sometimes we have these conversations, sort of dialing this back to like K through 12 education, is that we try to inspire people to get into the STEM fields by talking about that make it and break it piece. But I think sometimes we downplay or conveniently gloss over the amount of research, the amount of reading and writing that have to go into this, right? And I understand, especially with younger students, you do that because you don't want to scare them off. You don't want to make it sound boring. But I think especially with older students, we should be realistic about what all this entails. In terms of thinking about like what your education is like now, say think about the work you do in a semester, et cetera. Compare that back to your experiences in science classes, say in high school, or maybe in like the earlier parts of undergrad. Do you feel like you got the hands-on stuff that you liked? Did you get the research piece? Like, is that balance in proportion, or how does that stack up for you?
I can tell, yeah, just like you were saying, I think in high school, especially, this literature search portion is pretty much done by the teacher. They want to make sure that they give you an experiment that will more or less work, and they'll know what the outcome is, something fairly basic, right? Just to get your hands wet, basically. But not until undergrad is when I started to really get enforced that you kind of have to learn yourself through literature. And then you need to become confident in what you just learned to be able to present it. Because if you present it falsely, they would grill you on the spot. And we just had this one professor that just went in a rabbit hole because he knew everything. It's just like, just talk about what you know and nothing else. And if you don't talk about enough, you didn't do your homework, basically. So in high school, it's more like given everything, just do the work. And then in undergrad, it kind of transitions fairly quickly once I got into my major of, you don't just do what they tell you. You have to do more than that. You have to actually figure out how to take it beyond that, how to actually take the material and make it your own and how you interpret it. So I think that was a big learning curve, I think, for most people who go into college, is just not getting information, right? You're going to have to use bits of information, make a story of your own.
Yeah. And that's a process too, that I think sometimes high school doesn't sort of do justice to. I do a lot of tutoring on the side, and I'm working with a kid who's in a dual enrollment class right now. And so it's technically college work, but it's still done in the high school. And so, I think it's probably closer to a college level class than say your standard AP is, at least at this point. But he really didn't grasp like what research was. Like, I've been helping him with this research project. I'm like, no, man, you gotta read these articles now. And he's like, but I mean,
actually read them.
Yeah. And he's like, well, man, I can Google it and find some stuff. And I'm like, right, but everybody finds the same stuff on Google. Your job is to find something new, or maybe to find something that's old and say something new about it. I said, so you actually have to get in these databases and read it. And so I helped him find articles and sort of walked them through a model, like, this is how we sort of create our search terms, and this is how we're going to scour through the results. And this
that's a big one. Search terms.
But and you don't necessarily do a lot of that in high school. One, because it's boring, and two, because it's really time consuming. And so if you have a long curriculum to get through in a year, sometimes we make cuts in those places, which I think is like a pragmatic decision, but maybe doesn't fully serve the student. Like for me, the comparison in English, even just thinking like literary stuff, is that in high school, the teacher says, read this book, and then they give you a question, or they give you a couple of questions and you pick, and then you get to, college, and it's like, well, read this book and then go write a paper. And you're like, write a paper on what? And they're like, so now I have to figure out what's something interesting to say about it. Then I have to do the research, do all this. And so that some of those like scaffolds, some of that help sort of breaks away. Thinking about this in the sciences, do you wish that you had been tasked with more of that research piece in high school, or would that be
I think it's super important. It just depends. I think it's tough because in high school, everything is so structured. You don't really have that much time outside of school. I mean, because I was playing sports, and if I wasn't playing sports, I was in the gym. And then so I just look back at high school as in it was just basically 10 hours straight of work. I don't really, looking at literature is something I do now more or less in my free time, because you need to do it more in a relaxed state. If you do it in a very tense, like I need to get this answer, you don't really address, or you don't come to the information unbiased. You're kind of like looking for an answer in each paper, and you don't read it thoroughly. And I don't think you can, that's a lot of time that you need, that I don't think you can really do in high school, especially with multiple subjects. Unless you had something that was like I don't know, like a capstone project, you could definitely teach that in that encompasses many different subjects. But each subject having to do this kind of literature search, because you can do it with anything, math, English, science, like anything could really use like a good background research before you have a project.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what you're talking about is a combination of the skills that we are teaching, or well, we say we want to teach and that we're actually trying to do more of in high school. There's this big push for project-based learning where you sort of create, provide students with the opportunities and access to information, and then give them the opportunity to sort of play with it or do the work on their own. And rather than just take the quick test, move on, is to have a project that is not just the assessment at the end, but where the project actually teaches the content. So instead of the
Like
teacher
building layers.
yeah. So instead of the teacher like giving you the lecture, go read the chapter, then take the test, it's the teacher gives sort of the mini lecture, and then here's some stuff you might consider, and then give them the time to create a product, research presentation, actually build something, whatever it may be. And so they're doing the learning, but they're doing the learn. I think that when I was in school, and I don't know if you had this experience, but projects were usually treated like the dessert at the end of a unit. Like you learn all this stuff, you took the test, and then you got 2 or 3 days to goof around and do the project.
After like SOLs or something, like, I got time to kill. Just like, look at this.
Yeah, go play with this. And and I mean, I understand that and it works, but the idea now is to try to make the project into like the entree, like to make it the main course of your learning kind of deal, and you learn through it, which is a cool idea. My concern is that it's very time consuming. And as you just pointed out, like the amount of reading that you need to do, like that kind of stuff can be really tricky. Do you feel like when you got into that situation where you were asked to do that kind of reading and that kind of research, whether that's undergrad or graduate school, et cetera, do you feel like you were reasonably well prepared from what you had done in high school, or did you sort of have to learn it all over again?
Definitely had to learn it myself. And I was lucky because the way I was taught it was very intense. It was basically write a paper on this subject, and the whole thing just turned out red. And it wasn't like in high school where if you made the edits that they asked for, you got an A. It was like you got to make the edits and then add more beef to the paper, right? So everyone got this real awakening because they just took the edits and then they got the same grade, and people were complaining. And the guy was like, "You guys aren't learning anything. You guys have to actually add on to this." And that's something that I'll never forget, is just having this idea of you can't just take what people give you. You got to make it your own. And that's going to take a lot of reading that I had to learn, like what's important to read, what sources are good, what kind of questions you need to ask, like into Google. I think that's like a big step of what they don't really teach you in high school. They kind of just tell you what is blah, blah, blah. But you need to know like all the specific terms that give you specific answers in detail that you need. And that was something that you definitely need to learn very fast in research in general. You can't just ask like, what is a plastic? You have to be able to break it down piece by piece. And then as you're learning, you can ask better questions.
Yeah. You learn how to phrase the question and, Boolean search terms and stuff, which is funny. Like I try to, I sort of like toss that in as we're doing little bits of research, but I'm saying that we don't do this well. And well, I'm not saying everyone doesn't do this well. I'm saying that I think on average, this doesn't go as well as it should in high school. And I'm also probably as guilty of this as anybody. So, this isn't like a guy on a soapbox. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do all that. And I'm like, but I got 900 things I got to get through. So, it sometimes you have to make these decisions about what is more or less important in terms of how you put the time to it. In terms of sort of putting time in and for the purpose, the goal in high school is to build skills, to build, your knowledge, your skills, these abilities, and then to present you the opportunity to go to college or get a job or whatever. By the time you're on a PhD track, you've already sort of settled into what you're into and you have some sense of what you're going to do with it. For you, what is the career goal here? Like, do you want to become a professor? Do you want to work in a lab? Like what's the ideal outcome? And if that's maybe a reach, what's the most likely outcome? Like, where do you think you're heading?
I like teaching. I like doing personal teaching. Like I used to tutor a lot in college. But I don't know if I could lecture 200 people and know that like probably 100 of them don't care, or they're just taking the class to mark something off, you know? I like a smaller team, so, but I couldn't see myself as like a lead professor or PI because I don't know, academia is so much bureaucracy. I think it's just things move really slow. So I think a research job more in industry would be nice, but you get less freedom. You don't get to do as, you're not free to do research that you technically want. It's the research that the company wants and pays for, more of a budget. So I don't know. Right now, my plan is to just do a postdoc so I can do the research that I want for a couple more years. And then go back to this question 2 years later and then be like, okay, what do I actually want to
do? School until school runs out. And you're like, all
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Hey, and I mean, not that anything ended up that way, but I was very serious. I wanted to be an English professor coming out of undergrad, and so I took the GRE and I did really well. And then I took the subject area GRE and I was unaware of how focused that was on like Brit Lit. And I had taken a ton of American Lit. And so, and I scored okay. I was like slightly above average or something, but like, my GRE score was great. And then I was looking at it, I was like, crap, like I'm not getting into any of the best schools because my subject area doesn't look as good as the other one. And I was actually, semi-convinced by my best English professor that I should consider high school or, these other things. Otherwise, I could very easily have just done college until college ran out. And then, at some point they just start paying you to keep doing it. Like I stop paying them and they start paying me. But I mean, it's a tricky thing to think about. You're also in a very technical field. Like, what are the chances for you that you could say, take an entrepreneurial sort of path and work for yourself? Or is that the kind of thing that requires like, you'd have to work somewhere else first to build capital and connections and then do it? Or could you just out of school say, hey, I'm going to start my own?
You can do that. It's very common to do that in school. Say you come up with something and you can file a patent. You can then take that patent, you be partnered with the school that you did the research under, and you can start a small company with that. But I mean, you got to be wicked smart to be able to do that, and you got to get really lucky. And that's something that you also learn in research is some people just get lucky like this. Like some people are smart, but some people just stumble upon the proper resources at the right time that allows them to make a patent. I know guys, when I was a senior, their capstone project was they decided to recycle beer bottles into sand. And so they patented the process, and then they ended up selling it. And now they just like get royalties for selling sand made out of beer bottles. I mean, they just a bunch of guys that like beer. They had a bunch of glasses hanging around. They made it into sand. They ended up selling it everywhere. And I was like, I mean, what? Who knew there was a sand shortage?
Yeah, right.
It's just like hilarious. It's like you don't think of this stuff.
Yeah, well, and I had a student a few years ago. She's I guess she's still an undergrad right now. And she was one of these kids who applied to like, I don't know if she ended up doing it, but she applied to like every Ivy League school, sort of just to see if she could do it. Really bright, like not number one in the class, but very high up, strong scores, etc. And I kept trying to tell her and these other kids, like, it doesn't matter if you're in NHS or whatever, like you just need to find something you're into and then get really good at that. And she said that in the end, she ended up sharing her advice as a senior once she was into schools with some of the younger kids. We were sitting in a study hall and she goes, the reason I got into the schools I got into, she's like, I had a patent. She goes, they didn't care that I was in NHS or that I was in this club. Or she goes,
nobody asked you about NHS, man. All these things are just right. So
but when you're, in 10th and 11th grade, that feels like it's the biggest thing in the world. And when you're a parent trying to steer your kid in the right direction, you say, well, get it, add it to the resume. And I don't know that that's bad advice, but this girl, she went to like I forget the story, but it was something like she went to like some summer camp in like material sciences or something. And she created, she was trying to do it, but I think it was, like you said, maybe a little bit of luck in there. And she created some kind of like polymer, some sort of stretchy thing that it hadn't been made before. And she's still like,
I have to look this up now.
She got a patent. And I said, what are you going to do with it? She goes, I don't know. She's like, I mean, it would probably be good for like, I don't know, a cell phone case, but the important thing was that I did it. And then her parents had the resources to help her, and they hired like a patent attorney, and they filed it. And so when she applied to college,
that is not cheap, man.
So she got into a bunch of very good schools for, I think it was like biomedical engineering or something. But the thing, she had this experience, and so like you said, sometimes that's because you're good and sometimes it's because you're lucky, and probably in most cases it's a little bit of both. But that's the kind of thing that would open the door, say, to beginning your own business, or if you're younger, to getting into schools of your choice. For you, you thinking about the stuff that you were talking about. So you said, what was it? What you said, you just published an article, and you said it was
bio-based food packaging films.
And earlier when I said, what are you studying, and you said it was bio what?
I do stuff with cellulose, basically. So biosourced materials.
Okay, so what does that mean? Because now I'm thinking, like, I want to work in a direction of sort of thinking about like what you're actually doing and how this relates back to like how will people use the things you're doing, or
so
what is it you're actually doing?
This was an old project, so I would go back. So my PhD started at a technical school, actually. I was a technical school student, and I was also partnered with the university that I fully converted into. And this was really cool because it was a technical Swiss school. So I got to experience what basically their second branch of education was. So out of high school, no, not even in middle school, I would say 8th grade, they take like a PSAT, and depending on their grade and their scores, like their general grades, they basically put you in 3 tracks: a technical track, a university track, and basically like your general grocer track. And this technical school is like, it sounds more or less like a second tier, but it's a trade school basically. But they teach people how to become like lab techs basically. Mm-hmm. And you could transfer here and there. So that project was based on, I was trying to make a new film to replace like your like nylon packaging, like the thin clear films that you see like for meats and cheeses and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. We found they had the equipment to scale up a reaction, and I just need to find the proper mixtures and conditions to scale this thing up. And so everything that we were using was from like tree biomass, and you can convert it through all these reactions, and you can make everything in like a full loop cycle. Like there's no waste. That everything is from like a tree. You can convert it into like the starting materials. Then you get a plastic, just like your plastic bags. And then what we did was we tested like how much the oxygen can permeate through, because that could give you an idea of like how the food can spoil over time. And at the same time, I used another biosource filler to put it in and also help like reduce the amount of oxygen that can go through. It also makes the material a little bit more robust, so it's easier to handle. So if you have like a pen hit it, it doesn't just poke a hole. It's a little bit more resilient in that way. So they took that idea and I published it. So academically, that's under my work, but for them, they scaled it up. So they took it to a pilot plant and they're going to try to sell it in Switzerland.
Wow.
As like a product. So it was really cool to be in that process.
So the end result then, I'm assuming, would be fully biodegradable, right? Like
and that's the big debate in the field is, do you want to make something that's biosourced, or do you want to make something that's biodegradable or recyclable, right? So like, you want to start at the beginning of the process, or do you want to start at the end of the process? The debate is always, it's a little tricky here in the US because people don't recycle that well and people don't compost that well, right? But in Europe, it's way more emphasized. Like it's just more readily available, I would say. There's always a recycling bin that's sorted for different types of recyclables, like aluminum versus plastic and different types of plastic, right next to the trash can. Well, here everything's more or less a one-way, right? So their idea is always, we want to take the consumer out, take the responsibility out of the consumer and make something that's biosourced, because you can impact the scale of it at a much higher degree. So you can, instead of using all petrofuels and, all these like oil refineries and stuff like that, source it from basically dead trees. You can either source it from a green source, because the company makes, tons and tons of this material, right? Mm-hmm. So they're saying, if we can control the sourcing to be green, it's easier than convincing millions of people to recycle. And so that was kind of the aim of this project. But we kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone. This material is able to be composted, and it's recyclable because it can be melted, and it's like biocompatible. So they use it for like, the big thing is like sutures and stuff like that. So sometimes you get this holy grail of like all the different properties, but it can never beat the original like oil-based plastics. That's the problem.
Well, yeah. Oh, so that's what we're up against.
That's the catch.
Yeah, but I mean, if you find enough benefits on the other side, then it wouldn't necessarily have to. I don't know. This is a very layman's perspective, right? So I don't know what I'm talking about, but it sounds like if it provides all the other benefits, even if in the end it is a little bit less functional or harder to use than your traditional, petroleum based plastic, in the end it would still be better to choose it, assuming some degree of cost efficiency. Like
Yeah.
how important is it to drive the cost down? Because that's the thing, like
Cost
if
is
it's
huge, man.
yeah, well,
So
right,
big.
and because if it's 10 times as expensive and it's not quite as good, then it's
And you
going
can't make
nowhere.
money. I mean, if you can't make money, no one's gonna want to produce it, right? That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. When you take, I'm just thinking about like that was an awesome sort of explanation of it, and this is where I get it. I get nerdy about this stuff because I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like when we're done talking, I'm gonna go look this stuff up, so I want to know about it. The problem is I
Hmm.
have like almost zero knowledge of chemistry, so like I like the idea of it, like the big picture. I can do nothing technical with it. When you think about the discussion we just had, how much of that is or could have been a part of, say, what you were doing in your earlier coursework? Like, because the idea of that sounds cool. That's a real world problem. That's sort of a tangible thing. You can describe the trash cans, the down tree, every part of what you just said is relatable to almost any person. And that could serve as a great entryway into learning some of the chemistry, some of the other pieces.
Yeah.
Like, is
You
that
could
something
definitely do
that's
that in high
effective?
school.
Like,
Oh, my big thing is always like taking these big ideas and just breaking them down. You figure out such big ideas. Once you break them down, get more and more complex with each step. And then you can start, once you start picking it apart, you definitely learn a lot in all fields, like how they publish things, so a lot of English writing, and then just like how the math and science and all the chemistry works. But you don't have to the detail that I go into. Obviously that's going to be more advanced degree level, but like just the idea of like how do you recycle plastic? The idea of just like all you have to do is melt, separate some impurities, and then reform it. I mean, you can definitely teach that in high school. I mean, I had that actually in middle school. I compared like raw materials versus recycled materials, and you could just tell, I mean, recycled materials pretty much suck because it's hard to get them in the same mold and like they don't melt as well and stuff like that. But you can explain these things fundamentally in high school very easily. I just feel like, I don't know, maybe just some people just don't want to do it. And plus I feel like people are interested, but they don't care enough to actually put that much time into learning about it. And that's kind of where you kind of have a problem in high school, right? It's like how many people can you actually like grab
yeah.
and put the time in to learn all this?
Yeah, see, and that's, I just think when you present the real world problem, then it becomes more engaging. Like I would never call myself like a math person, but I liked math
Hmm.
until somewhere about halfway through algebra 1 when the teacher couldn't give an easy explanation of when I was going to use it. And then we did geometry and I loved it and I was good at it because I could see it. Like I could just look and I could see how I could use
Be
it.
real good at pool.
Yeah, I was for a little while I was, but like I got really good at geometry. And then we got into algebra 2 and my teacher, really nice guy, but I don't know if he couldn't or just didn't care to, but there were very few connections to like life, and I'd say, so how can I use this?
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't. I mean, there are plenty of things that require that kind of thing, that kind of math. But when it stopped being something I could see or no one could explain to me how I was going to use it,
Yeah.
for me, it lost all of its interest. And I went from being a decent math student to being a barely average one. And that was I just didn't care enough to do it. And so like in this case where you're like, what's really technical and how do you draw someone into it? For me, I feel like if you can present the real world problem and the benefit to solving this problem, I probably would have fought through some of the chemistry stuff I liked less because I could see how to apply that piece. And that's the part I
Yeah.
like about project-based learning is the idea of the project and the problem. I just always worry about like how long does it take and what's the practical value. But like your explanation there was awesome.
Thanks, man. I think, yeah, man, I remember learning algebra as well. And I just thought, man, this is so useless. Because I think, the story of how like calculus was invented, right?
How Newton invented and then had to reinvent because the other guy did it wrong or something.
Newton, like someone dared Newton to explain like how the planets moved in ellipsoids, and he said, "Oh yeah, I just explained it in like 6 months," and that's how he invented calculus.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like he took an idea to explain something. So if like for me, I always thought the best way to teach math is through physics, because the way I think of it is like physics is like your grand staple, right? Everything moves macro scale in physics. And then if you want to know more like how everything moves, the universal language is math. And then to make things like how do things stay together, that's chemistry. And then how biological things stay together, that's biology. But like you can always work backwards in this like pyramid style. So if you had like a physics class, like, I don't know, one thing I remember from taking in high school was like the energy in a roller coaster. And that's how we learned the fundamentals of physics. Like at the top, there's less potential, or there's the most potential energy, but no movement. And at the bottom is kinetic. I was like, oh, if people actually taught math like this and actually saw a roller coaster and be like, oh, wow, this actually makes sense. It's saying instead of like 5 minus 2 apples and then times 12 to the exponent of blah, blah, blah. It's like all these terms that
how many watermelons can I stuff in a station wagon? Like, get out of here.
Yes.
And, well, you know, but that's how I feel about English. Like my English class, I do a ton of history. Like I do a lot of anthropology. I mean, I was into that in college, and I think it's important because your literature, it tells you about how people think or feel or how they, live. And so anthropology and some psychology can inform that. But I always think if you put things into historical context, it works. So like I tend to get, I don't want to say better than other teachers. I don't know if that's true, but I tend to get good buy-in in my classes because even if the student doesn't love the specific thing we're reading, it's been put into this context where it's like, but this is how you can understand the world in terms of people, how we behave now or behave then. And so by getting rid of that artificial divide between history or your humanities and your English classes and, letting them come together makes it a more realistic way to look at it because you see how it connects. Like you just said with physics and math, like sometimes I think we draw these lines in ways that make them easier to teach the details, but probably make it feel less authentic to the kid learning it because like it's a man-made distinction. Like I don't know how well that works in adapting every curriculum or every subject area, but I think physics and math belong together. I think history and most of the social sciences and English belong together, and if you can find a way to package it that way, I think that students would see more value, if nothing else.
Oh, I definitely think you could package it. There's so many things you could just break down that involves all the subjects. I mean, you can't be for my field, you can't be a great scientist. The saying is you can discover something really, really good, something that could change the world. But if you can't give a presentation on it, if you can't write and convince people it's great, there's no point, right? The person who can convince a bunch of people so their communication skills is the one who gets the prize, right? So you need to be well-rounded in all these fields.
I love that. I'm gonna pull that clip separate just to use with my own classes because I tell everybody on the first day of school, and I repeat it several times for the first week or two, that English class, and I always say my English class, but English in general is not necessarily the class that is going to get you a job, but it is the class that every one of you will use. There's no exception. Every person in the room will use it. And every one of you, and I'm like, how many of you want to be engineers, computer scientists, and all these hands go up and I go, right now, if you're the best, say, computer programmer, they need you to stay the best computer programmer. But if you're just a very good computer programmer with excellent communication skills, that's how you become a team lead. That's how you
exactly.
Positions. Like, so I always say English may not get you your job, but English will get you the money once you have that job. That's your advancement. Yeah. I think that's probably true in a lot of applied sciences as well. I think, it might be harder to convince the average student in a chemistry class, how are you going to use this? Like that might be harder to reverse engineer in another subject area, but there's value in all these things. When you, and I don't know how much you can speak to this, when you think about like your experience going through American high school and how those courses are set up, how the testing works, requirements for graduation, et cetera. And then think about maybe the experiences of some of your Swiss classmates. How does their school system, again, I mean, I know you didn't go to school there, but in talking with them and observing, how do you feel about like the preparation the two do? Like, are they doing things better? Is it actually very similar? Like how do the different systems compare?
It's much more similar than I expected. I think a big thing, the only real difference I see is in the US, there's more emphasis on extracurriculars. And basically in Europe, your extracurriculars are language. Like, Swiss schools, but any school in Europe, like you're learning English at like age 10, right? So that's like dug in very, very fast. And I think that's something I took for granted because I took German classes when I was in 8th grade, and it helped my English much more than I thought it did because it taught you like different what's an adjective, what's a direct object, what's an indirect object, and like you kind of make these comparisons, and like sentence structures are more detailed.
I learned
But
all
for
that
them,
stuff in French. You're right. I learned it in French, not in my English classes. Like,
yeah, that's what I always think that's so funny because they're like, "Oh, you speak English your whole life." I'm like, "Yeah, but if I didn't have like a language class, I wouldn't tell you what a gerund is. I have
yeah.
no idea why there's an ing at the end of words." And but they put more emphasis in that. But you don't have as much freedom of choice, I would say, in like diverging where you want to go. They pretty much tell you exactly what you have to do. You have to make certain scores. In high school in the US, you have more exams, you have more homework. I think it's a little bit more structured, making it a little bit more easier because you don't have to learn how to manage your own time. If everything's due on a Monday, everything's due on a Wednesday, you kind of have your days planned out for you. I mean, basically, teachers have to do all the planning ahead of time. While in Europe, they at a very early age, like you have this, and then you have a test at the end of the semester. So it's like, good luck learning it. I will teach you, but like you need to make sure you have all the material by the end. And if you fail, you take it again. But there's no hand holding as much.
Do you think that's healthy? Like, I mean, is that good? Like when you think about you
Early on, I don't think it's healthy. No way. Because people, you're 12, 13. Do you know how to manage your time?
well, yeah,
You have all the time in the world. Like,
I'll
not
get to
gonna
that later.
do
I'm
that.
playing video games. Yeah. No, I think about a lot how I've been using this analogy a lot, probably because of doing the podcast. Like having these conversations has forced me to think about how to explain things that oddly enough now filter back into my classroom. But I think of school, especially early on, as like going to the gym. It's like the gym for your brain, or it's like it's practice. It's not the game. You think about like when you practice like you play. Well, you go to school, you learn the stuff. In the end, whether you get an A or a B or a C in the class doesn't necessarily say a lot, because very few of us remember anything really significant from earlier in education anyway. That doesn't mean it's not important. Like just because you don't remember every time you went to the gym doesn't mean that you shouldn't have gone to the gym those days. It just means that like the thing you're doing was building towards something else. And so I just think about like, yeah, we want to create functional, intelligent people. We also probably want to create like reasonably healthy and happy people. And so anytime you say, well, get rid of the standardized tests because it stresses kids out, I'm like, okay, but not all stress is bad, or so like where the kids have to sort it out for themselves. Like when you think about the people you're working with, are they all more tense than you? Are they all like, it doesn't make a difference by the time you hit, say, around the age of 30.
Oh man, I think they're pretty much, well, my field requires a certain person, right? So everyone's more or less their time management skills are much polished, I would say, because they know like things don't get done at a certain time and things need to happen in sequence. But overall, I just feel like the education was pretty much the same, man. Just memorization, block schedules. You're in school all day. And it's just, to me, looking back at high school, it was more like, how do you teach kids how to be more or less like disciplined, I would say. Like, how can you get them to consistently do something well in a timely manner? And that's something that you just kind of need in all fields of like a career. You just need to be able to be like, okay, I need to do this right now. Like, I might not like to do it, but I know if I do it now, I'll be happier later than if I just keep pushing it off.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because, we're doing locally, we're doing, what they call mastery grading, or like essentially you're grading based on the mastery of the content. So now there's no time penalty for turning it in late. Like if a kid turns it in on time, or they turned it in 2 weeks late, like it doesn't affect their grade. Now it might affect whether, and now anytime a kid scores, now technically in mastery grading, right, you just redo it and redo it and redo it until it's perfect, or until the teacher says that's sort of good enough. They've created, as a policy measure and to implement it evenly, if a kid scores below an 80% on any major assessment, they get to redo it, but they only can get up to an 80. In true mastery grading, they could get all the way up to 100%, because you want to prove that you mastered your content, right? Now, in one way, that's good, because it means that if the kid isn't ready for the test on one day, or they need an extra week to learn it, they have the time to do it. They can go back and learn it, and because, hey, the goal is to teach you the content. The downside, what a lot of people complain about, is that you drop some of the soft skills. You lose that, emphasis on hitting your deadlines or managing or being for the first time it's due. But you think about it, when you get a grade in English class, we look at that and we say, how good are you in English? But the reality is, like, how you did in your English class had as much to do with your English skill as it did with your ability to manage the time, to ask for help, to do all those other things.
Mm-hmm.
If we remove that from the grade, that's fine. But in the long run, sometimes that's more important. Like in some
That's
subject areas,
definitely more important.
and so I don't know how you separate that out, or, I don't know. I think a lot of people are playing with these ideas, and I don't know if I've seen a plan that really makes sense overall.
You want a grace period, right? Where you're giving people assignments and they can kind of learn for their own mistakes and not get severely penalized. But I think, I don't know, because my idea of it is always you want to be proud of what you produce. And so I would never hand in something that's just not full representative of like my potential. But it's hard to teach someone to actually, it's just, you can't make someone care if they don't, right?
Yeah. Especially if it's like, oh, this isn't my class. I don't care about this one. Like,
Just a check. They're just trying to get a mark, right?
yeah.
I don't know how you would put that in. I think it's a good idea to let kids like redo, but I don't know if you can get 100, because it's like how many times you as a teacher would have to reread the same thing over and over, right?
Hey, I straight up in my AP classes, I adjusted the grading scale. It used to be that if you scored a 5 out of 9 on the old AP like rubric, that was like a mid-D. It means it was functional, but it was inconsistent. It wasn't great work. Dude, now I'm like, because the average grade, especially early in the year, like 4s and 5s, I bumped that up to that's now the 80% floor. Now we write a ton of these, and so they're still getting that repetition. And if a kid asks, they have a good I'll still let them redo it. But the reality is, what I think that maybe people didn't think about on the policy level was, if they create this floor of 80% for the redo, all it really does is incentivize the teacher to give everyone an 80, so you don't have to grade it twice, right?
Yeah, because
so what
you're gonna get lazy eventually.
What used to be a 75 for me is now an 80. Now we still go through it. I still give them all the same comments. We still do the thing, and I'll still let them redo it if that seems appropriate. But I'm also not giving 50% of the kids or 40% of the kids the opportunity to write a second essay. I'm like, guys, I can barely grade the essays the first time.
Because how are you supposed to teach if you're always stuck in the old assignments, right?
I am horribly behind on grading at all times, but it's because I'm always trying to make sure I don't waste a class day, right? We always have a lesson ready. There's always stuff. I'm always prepared, but that means that sometimes I fall behind on essays and I have to pull an all-nighter 2 weeks later to catch up. If suddenly everybody's going to write that essay a second time, like, no way.
I think with the all-nighter, it's funny to hear that from you, because I feel like that's the biggest thing I learned in college was like, no matter how old you are, you're going to pull all-nighters eventually. Like you're eventually, work is going to pile up and you're going to be like, oh man, like, I guess like I'm eating ramen noodles and staying up all night with Red Bull today. Like it's just sometimes you just gotta. And those are the people that pretty much make it out, the people who are willing to like pull those all-nighters, or else that work would never get knocked down, right?
And I mean, it would be ideal if that wasn't true, but yeah, I do. I think that in a lot of fields, that is how it goes.
Yeah. I just feel like in high school, it definitely would have helped you guys if you had like an assistant that you would see in college, right? Like a TA. I mean, you would have to pay them, of course, but do you pay students? I don't know how that works.
I haven't talked about this in a while. I had this idea I floated maybe a year and a half ago. They're talking about class sizes and budgets and all this stuff. And I say, the easy way to save money is you have bigger class sizes. They say, oh, but then the students don't get individualized attention and blah, blah, blah. And I said, how about this? Move me out of my little classroom, put me in the auditorium. Instead of giving me 25 students, give me 50, give me 75. I don't care. And then give everyone else slightly larger classes too. And with the extra money that you save, because now we don't need as many teachers, you just hire a full-time grader. You would get more consistent data because the teacher doesn't have a bias. I like this kid, I don't like the kid. You would have a person who would just grade the paper based on the quality, based on the rubric, with no personal connection to it. I mean, it'd be a terrible job, right? But there are people who can read and grade who don't really like hanging out with students.
All just a rubric sheet, basically.
And I'll teach 75 of them at a time in the auditorium, and now I can use my study hall and office hours time to actually just hang out and talk to them. I can still get to know them, take the grading off my plate, and you could make the argument then that you could put more students in the best teachers' classes. And so this all sounds great until they're like, well, but how would you enact that? How would you? I'm like, I don't know that. That's above my.
I think you could. But... Oh, dude, that's so easy. I mean, kids 18, 19, they're always looking for a way to make a little bit of side money. You just have a kid that you like. Say you're teaching your English class. You have a kid that took your AP class that did well. They're going wherever to college. You just say, hey, if I just send you these papers, can you get them to me by like the end of the week? I'll pay you like $50. I mean, you can give them a free pizza from Domino's. I mean, they'll do it, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to take them that much time, right? And it's also, I feel like I would feel obligated because it's like the least I can do is help out my old teacher that kind of helps me get to this point.
Hey,
And
that's
if I
not a
just
bad
get a
way
little
to
bit of
like
money, it's like it's a win-win. And
farm it out to students. Yeah, as a way to like let English majors make some money or something. I don't know. I always think, there are ways to do this, and there is an argument to be made that in smaller class sizes are nice, especially in early elementary stuff. But by the time you get into like high school, like, yeah, it's nice to be in a class with 16 kids because the discussion and all that stuff. But if one teacher is noticeably better, then like really wouldn't you help more kids by putting 50 kids in that room because they're all getting better instruction? It's just that, how do you keep up the grading? So like, okay, so we're talking about some, changes that could make school better and ideally for the students, but maybe in that case for the teacher as well, or selfishly, at least for me, because grading's the worst part of my job.
I used to be a TA, man. I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah, that's so for you, if you could sort of create your own ideal school, and this could just be adapting what we do now or a completely new system. To you, what would be, say, the ideal school? If you were given a building and a budget, like a charter school, private school, you could just do anything you wanted. As long as kids are learning and not dying, you're free to do your thing. What to you would be that ideal school?
Oh man. So I guess like a high school, I don't know if I could really say much about middle school and elementary school. Because for me, my parents did a lot of my teaching outside of school. I had to go to a lot of like the C2 Learning Center.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a really good student until I took time outside of school to learn how to learn, basically. So I don't know, at that age, I feel like it's more home based.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was learning my multiplication tables at like age 3. That could be because my mom's from Korea and she knows how important that is. So
Yeah.
I didn't really have a choice, but I'm very grateful for it because I already knew math before I got into the school system. But I guess only in high school, I would say just like this project learning way, right? I wouldn't put, because I can't remember, in high school, it's like classes per semester or is it classes per year?
You need, I mean, different states do it differently. In Virginia, you need to take X number of classes to graduate, and then, however many classes per year. So you have to have like 4 Englishes, 3 maths, 3 or 4 sciences or whatever. And so, so it equates to basically 1 per year with a few exceptions. But yeah, I mean,
Okay. Yeah, because it's tough because you learn from any discipline, but I would say in general, I think high school is too long. I think it's just not tailored toward the teachers, to be honest. Like knowing, like we were talking about earlier, how much prep it takes for me to do literature search to then do an experiment, it probably takes just as much time for you to prep a lecture, right? To pull the right sources, how to teach it.
Time. Yeah. I mean, and that's also, I think, not to interrupt your idea, but that one of the things that people complain about maybe with teachers is that it becomes easy to get a little lazy or get a little complacent because once you have it done, I have that forever, we have to make a change. I have to teach a new book this year. Like, fine. But man, I have to do all that work over again. So it is a lot of work, but you can also usually reuse it year to year. So that's
you can polish it basically.
Yeah.
Probably not this more or less the same material, but like presented differently.
Yeah. But I mean, so you said too long. And remember, if we're thinking about this in terms of a private or a charter school where there's less legal oversight, you could in theory do it faster. You wouldn't necessarily have to do 4 English classes if the kids could prove proficiency faster or something like that. Like, do you think the time?
Oh yeah. I think the how linear it is, it makes no sense to me. I remember I had to fight to take more math classes. And I just thought it was the most absurd idea. I go into like the counselor's office and I said, I just want to take Calc 1. Like, well, you haven't taken Algebra 2 and you didn't take Algebra 2 with trig. So like, and you didn't take pre-calc. So like, you can't just jump to Calc 1. I was like, just let me take Calc 1. And if I fail, I fail. Like, why do I not have a choice? And they're like, well, that's not how things work. And I was like, so I'm going to take Calc 1 or what? Like,
did they end up letting you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, if I take Calc 1 now, I can skip it in college because I know in college it's going to be 10 times harder. And I don't want to make it easy while I have the time.
Right.
But I think in high school, it's hard because most kids probably don't know what they want to do into college. I mean, even in college, people are still figuring stuff out. For me, I got pretty lucky because I found out that like I'm pretty good at math and science. It doesn't mean I had like a passion for it, but I always had this idea like just keep doing what you're good at, and then eventually something will fall into your lap that you can really like master. And then through mastery is when you like develop this passion, right? Because it's kind of like it's part of you at that point when you're that good that you see the fine details. And that's something you kind of have to promote in high school. So like very much like we were talking about earlier, big picture into small bits. So maybe introduce the idea of like a world problem. I mean, you could just everyone knows like more or less the big five. I think world problems like plastic pollution, world hunger, like war, and blah, blah, blah. Blanking on the other two. But you can take those ideas.
they're kind of big too.
There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And but for me, like each one of those has its fields in STEM, and each one of those has its field in like policy writing, just how it's broadcast, how you can portray information, stuff like that. So you take any of those big ideas, because eventually the end all goal should be, how do I educate people into them solving, like helping the world become a better place, right? So why not start these big problems? So we take the example.
I'm completely spitballing here, but if you wanted to do something like that, one, it would probably help, as you started to say, to sort of create some more choice, like the number of classes you have to take or the timelines, like to provide a little more freedom or, fewer restrictions there would help. But you could essentially make one of those like a semester course and do like the first marking period is, all the sort of the background learning. You start with the big problems. True. And then you start into some research. And then as the second marking period piece, that could be where you have 9 weeks, 10 weeks to work independently to do your research. And at the end, you present your project. And at the high school level, you don't actually have to create the polymer, right? You just have to have the idea that you could present. So it could shorten the timeline a little bit. And the benefit to that would then be that you could even have 2 teachers do it. So you could have a teacher who focuses on the presenting the concepts and the big ideas.
Yeah, the soft skills. And
then somebody else who does the more technical piece. And you wouldn't have to, but you could even create some flexibility in the scheduling so that the teachers could focus in on what they're good at to support the students through the process.
Double down on the teacher's strengths. I think that was something that I kind of missed in high school, is like some teachers are really good at certain things, but they also had to teach everything in their field. But like you could tell teachers had passions and very specific like expertise in the field. And it's just like, you could tell the difference. You could feel the difference when you're a student.
Yeah. And you don't
kind of wish there was more of that.
Yeah. And that maybe feels a little bit more like it does in college, both with some of the choice and the project pieces. Like, is this might not be, but would this be a somewhat fair summary of your idea then would be to essentially adapt high school to be a little bit more like college in terms of the choice, in terms of the project piece, like the research, like, is that not in detail, but is that a fair summary of the idea to create that level of like independence?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how year by year you would schedule it, but definitely be learning how to absorb information. So this literature search, how to portray that information, so how to write it, be able to explain it. So you needed the math, the science. But then I think a big thing that we didn't really have in high school is just like real experience in terms of like, and you hear some kids I've met in college actually had the opportunity to do like these internships that you were talking about. Going into a lab, you don't have a lot of responsibility. Like you can't burn down the lab, but at least you can shadow someone and be like, this is why I do this. This is how it could relate to your class. And just having like that actual real world experience can make, I think, going back into high school in this learning environment a little bit more motivating and more connected. Just because you're just trying to build more connections, and that's how people will remember things.
Yeah, and I think there's a push for that too. Locally we now have like the senior capstone, which is essentially the last, I forget, 4 weeks of senior year. Students have to line all this stuff up by like February, and they have to have signatures and whatever. But if you line it up, they basically just get to not go to school for the last month of school. And you go intern at a business, you shadow someone, you get a job.
That's what they do in Switzerland. Yeah.
And then you just present, and there isn't even like a big presentation, but you just you present a log and like, here's what I did. And they go, okay, cool, great. And, but it means you didn't have to go to school for that last 3 or 4 weeks that on average was not the most productive time anyway. But it also serves as that little bit of transition where you have a little more freedom because some of these kids are getting jobs, some are going to college, whatever. And so it's an opportunity to try to apply some of the learning or to test out a job. My thing is it's been going well, as after we did it for a couple of years, like it seems like it's really catching on. My question is, why don't we do it sooner? Like, why is it the last month of school, senior year? Like, what would stop us from doing it for the last month of school, junior year too, or or sprinkle it in
doing
and
it every year,
or stagger it, and let freshmen do at one time, because otherwise all the local businesses are like, we can't handle all these kids. But if you found a way to stagger it by timing or things like that, I think people see value in the experience, and I think it is valuable. But if we think it's valuable, then I don't know why, again, we're treating it like the dessert, at the end. It's, hey, the last 3 weeks of high school. Like, if we think that's something you can actually learn by, then maybe we could find a way to filter that in, sprinkle it in earlier. I don't know. What would you have done?
No. What would I have done? Man.
Like, if you had that opportunity, whether it's starting sophomore, junior year, or just doing the senior year thing, like thinking back to high school, what would you have wanted to do?
I would personally, I would like to have done more like craftsman's work. I've done a little bit in college, just from like casting and stuff like that. But I kind of figured out what I don't and do like to do in that field. I think that's like a big thing. You gotta give kids a lot more opportunities to do things and figure out what they don't like, more or less, than trying to help them find what they do like. Like, in general, I liked working with my hands, but could I just work with my hands all day and not actually like manage the project myself, like not have control over like what's being made? Could I just like pour metal all day? And I was like, I don't think I want to. Pour metal is cool.
Yeah,
it's definitely a cool experience. Like, it's definitely different, but like, if every day I go in and I pour metal and I have no choice, so I just pour metal, it's like, I don't want to do that. And that's why it kind of pushed me towards more of an advanced degree.
Yeah.
But I would have definitely done something. I feel like summers were so wasted for me. I mean, all I did was work out for football, but I could have definitely like had like a carpentry job, or like learn how to do something so I could fix my house. I don't really know how to do that stuff. I know how to work a screwdriver, but that's about it.
That's awesome. That's actually something that I think I kind of backed into at first, and then my dad actually said it to me, because my dad's done a lot of different jobs in his life. And I now relay this advice to students, but I say, anytime you take a job that's not your career, it's maybe you're in high school, it's part-time, it's over the summer, maybe you're in college and you're looking for summer work or whatever. If it's not going to directly contribute to your career, it should do more than just give you a paycheck. Like, you should learn a skill. So like, I used to landscape, but I now can like take care of my yard. I can do all this stuff.
You like garden now, don't you?
Yeah, I've got like a big vegetable garden, awesome. All this kind of stuff. When I was first started teaching a couple of years, I had a buddy who's a very good stonemason, and his boss would work he actually used to work for a couple of years. He was a teacher at a Votech school before he started his own business. So I would go and they'd pay me okay, but I basically hang out, and my job was to push wheelbarrows and pick up heavy stuff. But the benefit was, the dude would explain what he was doing. Like, he would do his job, but he would just talk out loud and teach it. And I could ask as many questions as I wanted, as long as I never stopped lifting heavy things. But as a result, I now have like a patio and a big fire pit and all this, and I build it all myself. And I learned how to do it
so cool,
at
man.
a $10 an hour summer job. And so I always say, like, whatever you're going to do, if it's not something you're going to do forever, if, it's an internship for my career, cool. But if you're just, hey, I'm going to make a few bucks, I always say there should be some other skill that comes with it. So like you said, I could have done a carpentry job. I could have done these things. I think that that's something more people should be actively pursuing, because you can learn while you make a couple bucks. But maybe that takes, a kick in the butt to do it in the first place. Like,
plus there's no there's no avenues. No one really teaches you how to get into that. For me, I think summers were just like, I used to work retail. I mean, I learned in retail. I learned how to be patient amongst people who are very impatient.
Yeah.
And I learned that I don't want to sell clothes and fold clothes for a living. I don't want to push credit cards.
Yeah. I did that for a Christmas one time. I worked at American Eagle for a Christmas season during college, and it was mostly awful, but I learned a ton about like how you actually run a store. I was good at it. They're like, hey, if you don't go back to school in the spring, like, we'll promote you to manager. I'm like, I've worked here 3 weeks. Like, they're like, yeah, you're good though. You can do this. And I'm like, well, I appreciate your confidence. I don't want to do this, but thank you. And I've learned a ton, but I'm out. Like,
yeah, I definitely don't want to do this. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. But I mean, it was a cool experience. I don't know. I guess those kinds of opportunities, maybe could be more.
Do something, I'd say. You could learn from anything, really. I mean, I used to train a lot of kids in high school. How they would entrust me with the gym, I don't know. But like, it definitely helped myself in terms of like fitness. like I visualize how to learn how to do movements and stuff.
Yes. Okay. So I with that, because I have a question about that, and then we'll get ready to wrap this up. So we'll do sort of open mic and recommendations. But I both remembering you as a student, you were a very motivated athlete. And you've mentioned, working out or training for football several times, and that the schools in Switzerland don't sort of push that as much, or it's not a school involvement as much. How important to you were those extracurriculars? Like, because we don't
Oh
it's
man.
done through school, but it's not technically like you don't get a grade for it. It's not a class,
Yeah.
but
I think
like, how important
it
is
was
that?
so important for me as like personal development. Cause I mean, I don't know. It's just like this idea of like hammering more discipline, but also this, you don't get a lot of opportunities of like brotherhood and camaraderie, I feel like these days. And that's kind of what football gave me is this like, you have like 50, 53 guys that, you would lay your life on, just like you would do anything for these guys. And that's something that I don't see as often in Europe. It's kind of, I feel like it's a little ironic because the US is more individualistic, or I guess the Western world is more individualistic. Like you want your own goals, your own money, and blah, blah, blah. While the Eastern world is more societal. Like you do everything for the greatness of the country. But in Europe, it definitely feels like because you didn't have this much team activity, they don't understand this level of like team sacrifice. Because I always joke and I'm trying to push American football as much as I can. They watch the game. They go, why would you play something you just get everyone gets like a torn knee or something like that? And I was like, because one, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
But secondly, it's like you have like 11 people against 11 people. It's not one-on-one, like everyone counts on each other. And I don't think you understand like what that feels like. And then when you take that into like teamwork and like you take that into like more career goals, that gets more hammered on. It's like, I do this for the benefit of other people. But also at the same time, it's always good to have something that you do like for your own like fitness and health, something that like all the different ways I can I couldn't even imagine now learning how to go to the gym. I just feel like it's so overwhelming. But to be able to do that when I was young in a more of like a safer environment definitely makes it easier. And that's why I always try to extend a hand to like if people wants to get in shape and they need a trainer. Like I say, look, I give you 2 weeks. If you don't piss me off, you can keep following me around. But if you piss me off, go find somebody else. Cause I've been doing this for way too long to have someone slow me down.
See that? Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I played football through ninth grade, and it was weird because I grew late. So I went from being one of the bigger kids to all of a sudden I was one of the like not smallest, but I was a smaller kid. And it happened like quick, and I don't know what happened. And then I hurt my back because I was still playing football like I was a big guy, but I wasn't. And like I
Oh my
tore a
God.
muscle in my back, and I was basically out the whole season. And I was like, well, this is terrible. And my motivation was waning. And I was like, I don't know. My doctor's like, he's like, you got to be careful. He's like, you can play, but you got to be careful. If you tear it again, that's problems. And I was like, I don't know, man. I think I'm gonna learn to play golf, but still, like
Mm,
while I can still play golf and I'm good and all that, I learned more useful sort of skill, like you said, some of those like sort of the soft skills of like getting along with others, that teamwork, the dedication, the fitness stuff. I learned more that I use, in terms of the person I am. I learned more from football than I did from golf. And so even though, I didn't pursue it or anything like that, I've never regretted doing it. I don't know. I think that for a lot of kids like right now where sports are hard to pull off because of the pandemic and it's
yeah, I couldn't
happening,
even
but
imagine.
shortened seasons, altered practices, like all this kind of stuff. I think it's tough because there's a lot of kids who sometimes only keep their grades up to stay eligible for their sport.
Yeah, no.
A lot of kids have better grades in season than out, even though you're busier and you're tired. And it just, when you're working hard, you work hard in all of it. And so a lot of people get their best grades, do their best schoolwork while they're also going to practice and games after school. And so I think when we separate the two, it's a big change. Now, I don't know what that looks like in a place that maybe didn't have that dynamic in the first place, but I know I can see the difference, and so thinking about like how you separate those out, I don't know. Like you said,
Also,
it's
like,
very important to you. So
but I mean, anyone who does a team sport, right? It's just, and also with like injuries as well, they didn't understand like how you could be injured and then keep doing the same sport. And I said, it it teaches you a lot of lessons in life to like overcome like this kind of adversity, right? Because I don't know if you remember my last year at high school, I blew out my ACL and then I ended up blowing out my ACL again. But like the second time I blew it out, my right one, so both my ACLs are redone. I was like, I've already done it once. I know I can do it again. I know it's gonna suck, but I believe I can do it. But the first time I blew it out, I was like, man, what the hell? How am I going to bounce back from this? And then watching people in the NFL who have replaced their knees or like torn something and like they have a robotic arm or something like that. I just think, oh my God, like they are definitely way tougher than I've ever been. I couldn't even imagine what else they could do. They can bounce back from that. So that kind of like, yeah, overcoming adversity. I don't think you can really get to that like intensity as sports because you don't really, if you play like tennis, right, you're out for the season, but you're not really relying, no one's relying on you really. It's like, oh, it's like, this is my tennis career. It's kind of over. But if you play like soccer, or football or basketball and you're out, I mean, the team hurts when you're out. So like, you're going to do the best you can to get back and get healthy. It's not just for you, it's for other people. And I think that's like the big thing that I'm going to cherish from like when I played football.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, I think it's a thing that if the mission of school is to educate, then I think we need to recognize that a lot of people learn as much from their extracurriculars as they do from the classes themselves, and sometimes more. And so when we have a discussion about, I don't know, and I'm always careful about those words, especially doing a podcast like this, because sometimes improving education is not the same thing as improving school, and maybe sometimes like extracurriculars and sports, things that we do through school but aren't specifically sitting in class. Like sometimes those get brushed off a little too easily, I think, in discussion of what actually provides education, something that uplifts and empowers a person in their community. And for some people, sports are going to be as or more important. And maybe that deserves a bigger part in this conversation, to the points of like helping a person to become that independent decision maker, that person who knows how to work in a team environment and all that. I mean, again, I always sort of poke fun at National Honor Society, and I probably shouldn't, but you're not learning any of that stuff through NHS.
Do you actually? I can't even remember I did anything for the community for NHS. I remember it's just a ribbon.
Well, you have to keep a certain number of like volunteer hours, and they do like tutoring now, but half the kids just like tutor their friends, and they just hang out in the library.
I apologize, NHS. You do some stuff.
No, no, I mean, they do, and they do good work. So I don't want to undercut it entirely. I just, it for a lot of kids, it's like this goal to get into it without any recognition that maybe taking that same amount of time and pursuing something you were actually really motivated for, interested in, could have been a better use for your time and maybe a better line in your resume while you were at it, So I don't know. But all right. So let's work towards the end here. I'm gonna give you open mic. And that is there anything that we either didn't talk about that you had wanted to, or anything we did talk about that you feel like we moved on from too fast? And then we'll do some quick recommendations, but anything just on the general ideas that you want to address?
I mean, besides this, because of this pandemic, I think everyone should try in the US when you have the opportunity, always try to do a study abroad. Because like we were talking about earlier, there are things you will learn not about yourself, and also just from like meeting people who don't even speak your language. Like it's just the fact that you learn people who don't speak English as a first language, you get a much more appreciation for like where you are now. And just like from living abroad, I just know the quality of life here is just so much higher than overseas. I mean, like the idea of owning a house is just a foreign concept over there because they just don't have space and houses are too expensive. And like that just changes everything, right? Everyone's more used to closure spaces. But if it's a month, I did a month my sophomore year in Germany, and that's kind of what kickstarted my like travel bug. Definitely take advantage of that. Just like, I mean, the language can be an issue, but I mean, you can be an idiot and speak a language like for a couple months, but you'll get good at it. Don't worry. I mean, if you actually care, like you'll learn it super fast once you're like immersed in the environment. I definitely think, yeah, that's something everyone should look into at least before they finish like college, or if you can do it in high school, like do an exchange program, do a year in a foreign country for like your senior year. I think that would be, you will learn so much more than just doing whatever now.
That was a big part of the conversation with Sierra Wharton, was that her family had hosted like tons. They host like an exchange student a year or something. I think I've personally taught, I taught her and her brother, and I think like 3 or 4 of the exchange students they've hosted. So I'm like almost a member of the family just in terms of the amount of content.
Wow.
But that was her thing, was just that you learn so much by doing it. And that's actually, I'm glad you said the study abroad piece. That's my number one biggest regret from college, was that I didn't like my parents didn't go to college, or my mom went to community college for 2 years, but they didn't go away to school and they never looked into any of that stuff. So I didn't really know what I was doing or what those options were. And by the time I figured out how to go about setting up and signing up to study abroad, it was essentially too late. I was going into senior year and I had all these classes to take. That is, yeah, absolutely, study abroad during college. And if the opportunity presents itself, maybe in high school, but I think it's easier to do in college. And, so
Or PhD. I mean, who knows?
hey, yeah, there you go. By the way, I know just along those lines, you said your professor set up the idea of doing the study abroad. Would you have done it without that professor's sort of?
Oh, but didn't even cross my mind, dude. I didn't even think it would be possible, really. I looked at places in the US, but I was looking at places in like Mississippi, and I kind of, I don't really want to go down south to learn. And I was looking for jobs, but jobs weren't really intriguing enough for me. So like I knew I wanted to do a PhD, but I don't know. It's just like I was saying before, it's just luck. Like I happened to stumble upon this guy, and I was like, I've done it before. I'll do it again. Like it was tough, but it wasn't that hard. I mean,
I just, because sometimes, as you said, you're in the right place at the right time, and these can be, life altering sort of experiences, but you never know where they're going to come from. You never know how that's.
I definitely think if I could get people to do it earlier, 100%. It's just not as promoted as much as I would like here. The 1 month I did in Germany, it was because they had like a partnership. But there's a lot of like grants that you can apply for where they really would like to have like people from the US go somewhere else, and they'll pay you for 4 years, and you just do your PhD out there, or you just work somewhere for a couple of years. You can do it with postdocs. The master's is much easier to get into as well. You just do a master's in the US, and then you can do the PhD over there. You just got to look for it. But I had no idea. If no one would have told me, I wouldn't have been looking for it, because it just doesn't really cross your mind here.
Yeah, well, and you have so many schools here and all that kind of stuff. The idea that you would even consider the option, it's foreign to consider the foreign option, but it's good to know that it's there. Do you plan on moving back to the United States when you're done?
I'm like 50-50. If I find something nice here, but my network is out there now, so I have an opportunity to do a postdoc in Germany, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to take that one. And yeah, who knows? I'll be there for 2 more years, and maybe I'll come back with a really thick German accent, and that'd be really awesome. Impress you.
There you go. Well, that's if I'm still doing the podcast at that point. I hope I am. Maybe we'll do a recap and be like, all right, so it's like when it's down to like decision time, we'll be like, all right, signing day, like special episode.
I put a hat. It's red, black, and gold.
That's funny. All right, so let's get a couple quick recommendations. Books or movies that you think people should check out. This can be education related or just for fun, personal preference. What do you recommend listeners watch or listen to?
For books, I read 12 Rules for Life every year by Jordan Peterson. That is definitely my go-to. More for fun, but in the same realm. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho is also very, very nice. And I actually started reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. That's a tough one to read. That English is ancient.
So I tell you, I haven't read 12 Rules, but it has been recommended a few times. So maybe I'll check it out.
He's coming out with a sequel as well.
Oh, really? The Alchemist, I actually just listened to the audiobook for the first time this summer. I built my kids a big Playhouse swing set, and anytime no one else was out there, I'm sure my neighbors thought I was weird because I have this like sort of weird book. Well, no, I'm not there like sweating and like putting together lumber, listening to the Alchemist, on my stereo. But that was really good. And Meditations has become probably one of my favorite books. But as you just pointed out, the translation is important. Like, there are translations that are more or less. You
read that one, or you have the audio?
I read and listened to, and I have 2 different translations, and I can never remember which one is better. But there's one that's actually more modern that I don't think has the same impact. Like, it was easier to understand.
I have the most recent translation.
It didn't like feel as profound, And then I had one, I actually had one that I returned, an audiobook, because it was so bizarre. Like I just don't think it was well translated, but I actually liked one that was a little more old timey, because I had to really think about what they were saying. And as a result, I think it had a bigger impact. But
You had to
Meditations,
reread a lot of passages.
yeah,
Yeah.
Meditations is now one of my like top 3 books ever. So I'm with you on
Top
that.
3 books
Alchemist
ever. I'm
Journey too.
halfway through, so but I
Have
like
you,
it a lot so far.
have you ever read the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu? Like,
No, but I've read so that's Chinese, right? That's Chinese author. I've read the Japanese more or less version, the Book of Five Rings.
okay, I'll check that out. I don't know that
It's
one.
Yomo. It's more of like a samurai path book, but it's definitely like a more of like how to have an ideal life type. I guess you could call it self-help book, but I don't really
Yeah.
like that term.
Yeah, no, I don't either. That Meditations does some of that. I always just thought it was weird because Taoism actually has like this huge crossover. A lot of the Eastern stuff does with the Stoics. So if you like
Yeah.
Meditations, and there's a bunch of other Roman Stoic philosophers that are worth reading, but that for me is the book that stands out. And then Taoism has
Tao,
so much like it.
Taoism.
Yeah, so Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, I'm probably mispronouncing some piece of that, is like the original text. So that's really good. And if you want an easy intro to it, there's the what is it called? The Tao of Pooh. And it basically they explain Taoism using Winnie the Pooh. And
Oh, awesome.
it's really like it's kind of funny, but in the end, I read that first and I was like, maybe I should go to the actual source. And I did. I was like, that was fantastic, but a lot of the same stuff about like understanding your place in the world and
It's so
act on what
crazy.
you
It's
can and let go of the rest of it and all that kind of stuff.
so like culturally so different, but in the idea that the teachings are more or less the same, I just feel like it's so fascinating.
Yeah. I had a couple months there where I was on all this stuff that all connected, thematically, but in terms of time period and geographic origin, were so very different. And I was trying to explain to people how it's the same, and I think some people got it, and some people thought I was crazy. And I was like, maybe I should just shut up now. Like, so all right, so we got some good ones, and I added a couple to your list. I apologize. Any
Yeah,
others
no,
for your books or movies?
Uh, one more book, Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. It's more intense, but I definitely like that book. He's the guy who coined the phrase, the 40% rule. And this guy is just an animal. If you want real motivation, this guy came from nothing, literally ground zero, and now he's one of the most esteemed like Navy SEALs, ex-Navy
Nice.
SEALs. So,
I have not heard of it.
movies wise, I have to plug, of course, one of the greatest Korean movies of all time, Parasite. If you haven't seen that, definitely watch that. Watch it 3 times, 4 times, buy it. Help the Korean economy. And
Do you know Garrett Pierce? You guys, I think he was maybe a year older, 2 years older.
no,
Okay, so I talked to him on the podcast last fall, and he's a big movie nerd, and he gave like the most overwhelming recommendation for it. And then we finished recording, and he told me more about it. And a week later, he checked and he's like, "Have you watched it yet?" And I'm like, "Man, I turned it on, but I've got to read it." And I turned it on late at night. And I was like, I fell asleep, and it's not because the movie was bad.
oh,
It was like I turned it on like 11
so
o'clock at night. I
good.
didn't make it, so that's still on my Hulu list. But yes, so that's a must get
It's
to.
very, yeah. You definitely need to dissect that movie. You got to watch it a couple times. It's one of those movies where you miss a lot the first time, kind of like Get Out. You just see a lot of like cultural that you don't catch the first time. You definitely
Yeah.
got to see it. Spirited Away, that's more of a fun movie. It's like one of Japan's most popular Japanese animes.
Mhm.
I think most people recognize the characters. It's got definitely another movie with a lot of hidden messages about Japanese culture, a lot about how like prostitution is rampant, but how they sneak that in, and like how society is laid out, all in a cartoon. And anything by Studio Ghibli, which is the people who made Spirited Away, have these like kind of hidden messages. And all these movies are, it's weird because it's an animation, but it's about 2 hour long movies, which you don't really see. And then the last one is 100. It's a German movie. If you can find it with English subtitles, that'd be good. It's called 100 Things, or 100 Dinge. And it's just basically about 2 guys that start a company, and they make a bet. If they can survive 100 days, and each day of the 100, they only get to keep one of their possessions. And so it's just a very good movie on like materialism and how much you actually need in life, and how life can be a little bit better if you don't have as much stuff just kind of weighing down on you.
Nice.
German films. So, if people can get, I mean, I think I gave all, besides Get Out, these are all foreign films.
Yeah,
Read
yeah,
some subtitles, guys. Come on.
that's hey, I love it. That's actually my rule. I show very few movies in class, but as a rule now, if we do watch something, I put the subtitles on because people are like, I keep reading it. Well, good, you're in English class. Come on, like just read it. Good, keep
You
up.
can read. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's a good thing. What are you talking about? All right, awesome. So hey, that's a monster list. You got some really good stuff on there. And a couple of, like I said, a few of these have been recommended before. Spirited Away. I think I actually watched that, but it was a long time ago. But that's been recommended several times, probably by a lot of like former students around your age. So I think that maybe has part to do with like when it came out. But that was really good. I just don't remember a lot about it, but that was really good. Parasite. That's now at least the second or third recommendation. So maybe before winter break is over, maybe that one jumps to the top of my list.
Oof.
Gotta sneak it in here while I have a few more days off. All right. Well, Chris, I appreciate you taking the time to talk. Again, we've been talking with Chris Rader, who is attending school. He's working on his Ph.D. at school in Switzerland. Do you want to plug the name of the school or?
Oh, yeah. I study at the Adolph Merkle Institute. It's part of the University of Freiburg. I work under Christoph Vader. We do research in nanomaterials and bio-based materials. So,
Right. So
if you have questions, just maybe just put like an email or something if they want to reach out, figure out how to get into a position like this.
awesome.
More than willing to help.
Yeah. So what I'll do is in the show notes, I will include some links to maybe your email or social media. We can talk about that here in a minute. And if anyone has broad questions, I can handle them, or specific ones will go straight to Chris. But we've had a great conversation here talking about his experiences in school and ways we can maybe make school a little bit better. Also got some really nice like cultural comparisons, both in education, life in general, and a powerhouse list of recommendations at the end. So Chris, thank you again for taking the time to talk today.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It was good catching up. I mean, we haven't really talked in years, but this felt like just a regular conversation. It's cool to talk to you like this after high school.
Yeah, right. It's weird like checking back in sometimes, like, talk to teachers and you're like, oh, hey, we're like normal people now. That's
Oh my God.
yeah, that's bizarre. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.